Hello, and welcome to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast, where we discuss nonprofit technology, cybersecurity, tech project implementation, strategic planning, and nonprofit IT careers. Find us at communityit.com. Thank you for joining Community IT for this podcast, Part 1. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits. Listen for Part 2 in your podcast feed.
Welcome, everyone, to our webinar presented as a partnership between Build Consulting and Community IT Innovators. In this webinar, Build Consulting's panel of experts will be answering the questions you submitted regarding selecting nonprofit software. My name is Peter Miras, and I'm serving as the moderator and as a panelist for today's discussion. I'm passionate about helping nonprofit organizations fulfill their mission by leveraging technology, and I'm very happy to be with you today. And I'm also happy to welcome two of my colleagues from Build Consulting. First, David Deal, also a partner of Build Consulting. Will you please introduce yourself, David?
Thank you, Peter. I'm David Deal. I'm founder and CEO of Community IT, and more recently a founding partner at Build Consulting. I've spent my 25-year career in nonprofit technology, and I'm glad to be here today and to contribute to our panel of experts.
Kyle?
Kyle Haynes, partner at Build Consulting. I'm always excited anytime anybody thinks I'm an expert in anything, so I appreciate being invited to today's webinar. And I guess why I was most excited to be on today's webinar is because I think oftentimes selections are the beginning of implementations, and I think they're incredibly important to do well and to get right. And so I'm excited to see the questions today and share my experience and wisdom that I've gleaned over the years.
Thanks, David and Kyle. We'd just like to share a few thoughts with everyone on the webinar attending before we get into the questions and answers. The first is this slide that we often share with our clients. It means old organization plus new technology equals expensive old organization. And we just share this to illustrate how transformation is critical to success. As Kyle just said, transformation or change management or any successful organizational change process involving technology begins with selection, if not prior to selection. That's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. And when people ask what does successful transformation involve, well, it goes all the way back to leadership and governance and your operational capacity, the processes that you execute as an organization, the data that you manage, and then finally technology. And that's why one of the subtitles or the subtitle for this webinar was Technology Comes Last. It really is the last thing that needs to be taken into consideration for successful technology selection and implementation projects. A lot of things upstream of the technology selection actually need to be well ordered or done as part of the selection process in order to make sure that that resulting implementation is successful. And now we'd just like to get into the questions that you shared with us in advance when you registered for the webinar. We received a number of excellent questions, which we boiled down into 10 that we'll plan on answering during this session. And if we have extra time, we'll take additional live questions. Again, feel free to use the chat features of GoToWebinar to submit them as we go, and I'll try to weave them in as we're answering other questions or at the end. And it's an informal, collaborative discussion between the panelists. If you'd like a more comprehensive answer to a particular question or that speaks more directly to your individual situation, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, and we'll be happy to have a conversation with you. So without further ado, let's get to the first question. We are about to select a new CRM. What are the top 2 or 3 things we can do to make the selection successful? We're going to talk about the CRM specific question here, but most of our responses, I think, are going to be applicable to all major system categories, such as accounting systems or marketing automation or e-commerce platforms. And I'm going to just lead off by answering this one and tee it up for my colleagues here. I think the number one thing that you can do to be successful with the selection is to do solid business requirements definition. one of the things that contributes most to technology implementation failures, which is about 50% of projects, is that you have good requirements definition, and that process is led by somebody that's been through it before. Guiding the business requirements definition process is one of the reasons why people engage with Build Consulting in these kinds of efforts, because we have a lot of experience in that. David, how would you go about answering this question?
So a couple of things come to mind for me. I think the first is participation. And what I mean by this is no one likes having software forced upon them. So I think it's important to determine which individuals and teams that new CRM would impact, and make sure the individuals and teams that are engaged in that process in some way. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. I think the second is, vendors love nothing more than to reach you early in your process, to get you into their way of selling their software. They want to give you a demo. They want you to try it out. So I'd say make sure you're driving the selection process, not the vendors. And that means first, to Peter's point, understanding at a high level what you need the CRM to do, what your requirements are, and then making sure that those vendors show you how their software does those things. Not just the dog and pony show, but how is their software going to execute the processes that you need it to execute?
Yeah, this is Kyle. I think it's incredibly important also to understand, and I think, David, you touched on this, how this project and how the implementation of any system, but especially a CRM system, how it's going to impact your organization. And I think given the number of people who would be touched by it, it's important to get leaders to sing from the top of the mountain how important that project is, how much they appreciate the hard work that is going to be involved in selecting a new solution, and make it a frequent refrain. Make a refrain on how important this is and what the return on investment for the organization is going to be.
Those are great points. I think we're going to answer some questions that build on this. So specifically in regards to requirements and who needs to be involved, change management aspects. So we're going to leave it there for this question for right now and get back to it in different, deeper ways later on. This next question is, my executive director wants to go with solution redacted, shiny solution X, but I'm not sure it is right for us. How can I pump the brakes on that? That's an excellent question, and one we hear at a lot of nonprofits over the years. Kyle, what would you say on this one?
Yeah, I mean, not only do we hear it all the time, if you go to a vendor conference, you see people wandering around starry-eyed with promises that that new solution is going to be the thing that transforms how the organization works. And I think it's important to acknowledge that there is always going to be a lot of excitement around new or popular technologies. And often also you need to recognize, at least in my experience, that this is historically how organizations have selected software. It's based on what they hear from others in the field. It's what their colleagues are doing. It's what the organization that they aspire to be is doing. So the shiny object syndrome is not unfamiliar or uncommon. I think what I try to do is orient the organization first around documenting their requirements. And even if it's framed as an internal exercise only, it is something that you can reasonably and accurately say, this will ultimately help with the implementation of that shiny new object, if that's the direction the organization ends up going in. And once you've done that, once you have a sense of what your internal requirements are, maybe you can then see with your executive director or whoever is pushing or advocating for the change, see if there's a willingness to make sure that the requirements that you've identified, that the new solution is actually going to meet those requirements. And in some way, this is a backdoor way of doing a selection.
This is David. I'll just add a couple of things to that. I think Build has some webinars that emphasize that technology comes last, such as this one. But I would encourage you to point your executive director to one of those, or maybe take a still frame from one of them showing that about 50% of CRM projects fail, or one of our blog entries that talks about studies showing that 30 to 70% of enterprise software projects fail. So, I think that's one thing you can do to say, hey, let's slow down a bit. Let's do the requirements definition that Kyle was just talking about, or I should say, and promote the idea that the organization really needs to start, and the leader needs to start by envisioning and articulating the change that he or she wants to see in the organization, and articulating how technology can support that organizational change. There is probably more than one solution in almost every scenario that could meet those needs. The second thing is, if you want to play a little bit of hardball here, if it's a big dollar investment, just ask if the leader really wants to go in that direction without the due diligence required to make an informed decision.
Those are great points. This is Peter again. The only thing I would add to that is that sometimes where the solution that's being sought is a platform like Salesforce, you might have an executive director that says, we should go with Salesforce, but not really understand the infinite variety of possibilities that could exist within that platform, even just for something as specific as gift management or case management. So really just doing some education there, sort of politely probing into, well, when you say Salesforce or when you say Dynamics or anything else, or when you say even LMS, learning management solution, what does that mean? How should we interpret that? Give them a little bit of exposure to the breadth of various options that are available there. And it might not be as clear-cut of a solution as the leader originally anticipated.
This is Kyle. That's an interesting point that you just made, Peter. I actually have a client right now that began with the supposition that they needed a learning management system, and through the process that we're talking about, actually recognized that LMS was a part of what they needed to do, but it was actually an entirely different type of solution that they needed. So I really think that's also important for the organization to understand that sometimes the shiny object they think they actually need an entirely different, maybe not even shiny, just a different object altogether.
Yeah. Speaking of CRMs, on our next question here. The last time we implemented a CRM, it failed miserably. How can we prevent that from happening in the future? David, what would you say in response to this?
Yeah, so I think, Build would start by asking what went wrong and why. Because failure is really one of the best teachers. It's probably the best teacher. And, it can be an uncomfortable place to go to talk about why it failed, especially if you're trying to be thorough and transparent in that process. Sometimes it failed because of the people involved, frankly, or sometimes it failed because leadership didn't provide sufficient vision of how people should use the system. So I think to answer it effectively, you've got to be willing to go there. It helps to have some degree of objectivity in that analysis, and I know that can be difficult for someone inside the organization, particularly if it involves assessing the capabilities of team members. I think the second thing I'd ask is, how are things different now? Have the conditions at your organization changed to give you a greater chance of success? Success is never guaranteed in these enterprise software projects and CRM projects. And are the necessary pieces in place to do that effectively? If the answer is no, you're probably going to get the same result.
Kyle, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think I'm thinking about CRM implementations as it relates to other types of implementations. And I think in some ways they're some of the most tricky implementations. I think we can think of a couple reasons that they're tricky. One is that they oftentimes involve an expectation that staff behavior is going to change alongside that CRM implementation. So a fairly dated but classic example is The technology is envisioned to help major gift officers use the system more effectively and guide how they do their work. Well, that involves behavior change. And I think we've hit upon in multiple places in the webinar already that technology rarely drives behavior change. So on a CRM project, thinking about what behavior has to change and how you're going to encourage or enforce that change is important. Secondly, with CRM projects, I think about, in some ways, the constituents or the consumers themselves of the change. They're the ones who are also going to feel the impact of the change, or at least hopefully feel the impact of the change through better tools that will allow you to manage and engage with constituents effectively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the only thing that I would add to that is that a lot of organizations, in my experience, do a couple of different things, and this is a particular thorn inside of organizations that are trying to do CRM implementations because of the complexity factor that Kyle mentioned. One is that they don't often do, for lack of a better expression, postmortems on prior projects. Failed technology projects are kind of like, the thing that people want to avoid talking about. The team members avert their eyes from each other when they see each other in the hallways after a failed implementation. So, as David said, that can be a challenging thing to revisit, but it's important to do so. Also, nonprofits, and this is true of other kinds of organizations as well in the for-profit sector, don't do a great job of estimating the amount of time that it takes to select and implement a complex system effectively. They just sort of figure, well, it'll get done because it has to get done, but there's not necessarily any increase in resource availability to make that happen. So it oftentimes gets sidetracked or time gets cheated away from it that needs to be applied by competing initiatives or just the ordinary everyday business of running the organization. So those are other challenges, and really scoping to make sure that you can select and implement a CRM effectively is a big challenge, and we'll touch on that a little bit more in a few minutes. This next question is a good one, and we touched on this earlier as well in the first question. Who needs to be involved in the selection process? And I'll take the lead on answering this one. Usually there's some sort of core team, and then there's an extended team of other stakeholders that need to be involved. For the core team, you might have a range of executive sponsors, department managers, or managers within the department that are primarily affected, and some external advisors or consultants, whether those be vendors that are competing to provide a solution or a consulting firm like us that's providing some strategic assessment assistance. And then the extended team or the other stakeholders might include key subject matter experts from within the organization, people that know the business and its processes really well, end users, peer organizations. Sometimes you can, for a CRM system specifically, you might want to ask a couple of your peer organizations what they're doing and what they're using and what kind of experience or successes they've had with it. Board members can sometimes be involved in an extended team, depending on what kind of board you have. And so there's a variety of different folks that could be included there. But the core team should be the people that are responsible or accountable for making sure that the selection and the subsequent implementation are a success, and then the other stakeholders sort of fall into that consulted or informed category. Kyle, what would you add to that?
I think the only thing, what I was thinking about, and I talk about this a lot with my wife actually, who works for the retailer QVC, what makes the nonprofit space unique when it comes to these types of selections is that people want to feel connected to the understanding, or at least they want to feel connected to the process in some way and how the organization arrived at the solution. And I would say as a rule, anyone who's going to be impacted by the new technology or the new software should feel like they got a voice in the process. And that voice can look different. Sometimes it can look like simply asking through a survey for feedback and input, other folks are going to expect a seat at the table in selecting the software. And each project is going to look a little bit different. And you talked about different types of participants in the project or in the selection, Peter. So you can tailor the engagement with those groups in different ways, depending on whether they need a seat at the table or they just want to feel like their voice contributed to the solution itself. And one of the ways that I help clients often identify those people is using a tool that you can download from our site. And it's a change management impact grid, and it catalogs who's going to be impacted by a change and the extent of that impact. And it's amazing to me how difficult sometimes it is for organizations to develop that list and really understand the list, but it's invaluable at the outset because it really creates a panoramic understanding of all of the folks who are going to be impacted by the implementation of new software.
I'll just add something quickly here about the term core selection team. I think what we envision when we say that is a group that, in my experience, it's typically 6 to perhaps 10 or 12 people at the absolute most. But this is the group that's responsible for reviewing and contributing to the things that are being published as part of the selection process, like an RFI or RFP. This is the group that also participates in the vendor demos. So it's important that it be a representative group and that it also be a group that is large enough to be representative, but also small enough to be nimble in being able to make decisions or at least make recommendations to whoever's making a decision.
And I would just add really quickly, I think that's right. And I think also you want some diversity on that team as well, from the perspective of a diversity of different experiences and perspective and history of the organization. So you don't want 6 to 10 people that are just going to green light everything. You really want people who are going to ask tough questions and represent a broad swath of perspectives from across the organization.
Yeah, David and Kyle, that is great context to sort of relate the stakeholders to the different parts of the process. The change management impact template that Kyle mentioned is available if you go to the buildconsulting.com website and then go to resources and look under learning. You'll see that featured in that list of resources that are available. So walk, don't run, and after the webinar and check that out. Let's move on to the next question. We want to select new software for a particular challenge, but I feel like our managers don't know what business processes they want to follow. And the business process is not the process of doing the software selection, but the business process that they're responsible for executing inside of the organization, whether that be gift management or managing an online community or whatever the business process is. So how important is it that the managers pick the business process before they go into selection? David?
I'll offer a couple of things here. I think, first of all, clearly it's crucial. Having a vision about how the organization wants to function and how a piece of software is going to support that is a vital part of a successful implementation. A lot of times I'll hear people, staff describe that they're unclear on the current system because they haven't been told how they're supposed to use it. Or they'll say they haven't been trained on it. And a lot of times what that will come down to is they haven't been given clear guidance on here's how we'll use this system to support our process. So it's less the mechanics of training and it's more having a vision and a clearly articulated one at that for how it's going to be used, both broadly and specific to certain business processes. The second thing I would say is that there's really a couple of things you're balancing here. One is that you do want to be clear and prescriptive about how you want to work so that a vendor can understand what it is that you want to do. But you also want to be open to suggestions that vendor might bring for improvement. So we really encourage thinking of the RFI, RFP process as a conversation. So you want the vendor to understand how their software needs to support you and you want to be open to the ideas that they may bring to that process. Not every vendor is going to be able to do that, but the best vendors and best systems implementation firms will have some ideas and some prior experience to inform how the software might help you to operate more effectively.
Yeah, I always look for a way, and I think there's different ways. It could be an RFI or an RFP. It could be some other way. I think it's incredibly important for vendors to have an understanding not only of how the organization works, but what organization are they walking into? And there's three things I think that are important. The first one I learned from working with you, Peter, is that it's important that they understand the people that they're going to be working with on the project. How experienced are they with the type of project that the organization's taking on? How familiar are they with the types of technology that they're going to be selected? Is this the very first learning management solution they're ever going to use? Or are they working with somebody who this is the fifth job they've worked at and worked at 5 different learning management solutions? I think that's incredibly important to communicate to vendors so that when they're thinking about what it would mean to work with your organization, the experience that the organization's bringing to the table. And along with the people, it's also important for the for the vendor to understand how experienced the organization is. So if, in my example earlier, if the lead person has done worked in 5 different learning management solutions, but the organization has never worked with one, that's important information for the vendor to have. It's important because they need to know that they were going to have to lead many conversations in the implementation. They're going to have to bring expertise to the project that the organization might not have on board themselves. And then lastly, I think the more you can communicate how your organization functions, and I mean makes decisions, what the decision-making process in general looks like and what the decision-making process for a selection looks like, the more information you can give, the better. And this is more than just copying and pasting stuff from your website. This is giving the vendor, as much as you can, an inside baseball understanding of the organization.
Thank you for joining Community IT for this podcast, Part 1. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits. Listen for Part 2 in your podcast feed. Community IT does these free webinars and podcasts for our community, and we love sharing our knowledge and experience. If you have more questions or are having trouble with your IT at your nonprofit, please get in touch with us on our website, www.communityit.com, so we can start a conversation or schedule an assessment. Downloading any of our free resources there will get you signed up for our webinar reminders, and you can attend our next webinar in real time and ask our experts your own questions. If you love podcasts, please subscribe and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits.